Now, if you just think about it, and I'll on the next slide show you a couple of examples, but before we get off of this one, think about where Toyota started in the world automobile market. They did not start making Lexuses, did they? They came in at the very bottom of the market with the crummy, rusty little subcompact model, which in North America was called a Corona. And as they hit the bottom of the market, the reaction of the North American automobile manufacturers was just to give the subcompact end to them. And Toyota then went from a Corona to a Tercel to a Corolla to a Camry to an Avalon to a 4Runner and then to a Lexus. And every once in a while, Ford and General Motors, up there on that sustaining trajectory, would look down at Toyota coming at them and say, you know, we ought to go compete against those guys. And so they'd design models that they called the Chevette or a Pinto, and they'd send them down to compete against Toyota. But then when they compared the profitability of those little subcompacts with the profitability of a Cadillac Escalade or a Ford Explorer SUV, the little ones just made no financial sense. And so they keep fleeing up market to the big vehicles. In the meantime, Toyota keeps going up market toward the big vehicles either. And there is really what we call on the top of that slide an asymmetry of motivation. And that is, if I want to kill a leader, I want to kill a giant, and I'm just a little boy. The probability that I could kill a giant is much higher if I pick a fight with him that the giant is actually motivated to walk away from rather than engage in. And that's the reason why the odds of success are so different. So if a little company tries to enter an industry by making better products than the leaders sell, the odds that the leaders will win that fight are very high because the leaders are motivated to win the fight. But when an entrant comes in with a disruptive strategy, the odds favor the entrant because the leaders financially are just motivated to walk away and create that room. Now, could you go to the next slide, please? I've just listed there in the blue column in the middle a set of companies whose stock we wish we had all owned over the last 20 years because they've done very well. Every one of those companies, Toyota, Dell, Apple, Ryanair, Fidelity, Canon, Microsoft, Oracle, Vodafone, Merrill Lynch, actually, if you go back in their history, they came into the bottom of a market with products that weren't nearly as good as what the leaders were selling, and they disrupted the companies in the yesterday column that's there in red. And then for every one of those, there is another disruptor coming at the bottom of the market after them. For example, are you worried about Toyota? Well, if you look down at the bottom of Toyota's market, the Koreans have already stolen the entry level or the subcompact end of the market, not because Toyota isn't capable of winning in that market, but why would any sensible manager ever invest to defend the subcompact end of the market when Toyota has the privilege at the high end of gaining share against Mercedes? And so they look down and they don't see money, but the Koreans coming from the bottom looking up, all they see is money. And then you have the Chinese and some Indian companies coming at them tomorrow. So that's the answer from the first question that we were trying to understand as we did our studies of what is it that kills successful companies. Oddly, it almost never is that somebody came into their market with a better product, but rather they got disrupted. Now, could you go to the next slide for a minute? We just did an evaluation of how did companies get onto and off of Fortune's 500 list. So a lot of them are resource-based companies in oil or materials where disruption really doesn't happen that much. But 35% of the companies on the Global 500 got there through disruption. Others got on because they were merging their way onto the list. So for example, as the mini mills were disrupting the integrated mills, there was so much excess capacity at the high end of the market that people could buy those things out of bankruptcy and consolidate them and make their way onto the list. Of those that have fallen off of the list, again, 35% fell off because somebody came in underneath them. Next slide, please. Now, I had a student who returned to Japan a number of years ago. He took a job in their Ministry of International Trade and Industry. And the poor kid got sentenced to write a plan for the resurrection of Japan's economy. This is really an interesting question, isn't it? Because during the 1960s, 70s, and most of the 80s, Japan's economy was growing like gangbusters at unprecedented rates. And there were all of these books written about Japanese management techniques, if you remember. And then about 1990, Japan's economy just went, and has been stuck in a stagnant swamp for 17 years. And so my student worked on this problem for about 18 months and then called me up one day and he said, Clay, there is absolutely no hope for Japan. And I'm a very optimistic guy, and I said, surely there's something that the Japanese do, and so why don't you come back to Harvard, we'll spend a couple of days and we'll solve Japan's problems. So he came back, and in about an hour he convinced me that there truly was no hope for Japan. As you go back and think about what were the industries that constituted the fundamental engine of Japan's economic miracle through the 70s and 80s, they all started at the bottom of the market and went up. So Sony did it in consumer electronics and killed RCA. Toyota did it in cars. Honda started in motorcycles and then they came into cars. Mitsui did it to the Western shipbuilding industries. Canon disrupted Xerox over and over again. And by 1990, that set of companies had hit the high end of the market where the profit percentages are attractive, but the unit volumes are not. And so when they hit the high end of the market, the economy just stopped growing. And who disrupted Japan was Taiwan, Singapore, and Korea, who came in at the bottom of the market, even as Japan was killing the North Americans and the Europeans. And now Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore are very near the top. The reason why my student said there's no hope for Japan is he said, think about what happened in America and Western Europe, but primarily in America, as the Japanese were disrupting. The leading companies just went bankrupt or they downsized, and as people left, a lot of them just picked up venture capital and started new waves of growth in other industries. And so even as America got disrupted in manufacturing, the economy kept going because of the entrepreneurial infrastructure, but Japan doesn't have it. They don't have a venture capital industry, they don't have labor market mobility, so they played the game once, and it's over. And now as the Koreans, Taiwanese, and Singapore get to the high end of their market, here come the Chinese and Indians underneath them. And it really is a very scary thing for those of us who are on the high end at the growth potential that comes. So there really are microeconomic roots to companies' macroeconomic prosperity. And I think that's the reason why we feel that dynamism when we come here or in China. Could you go to the next slide, please?